Jai Anilo Premadano Karma Kacho
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text number 6. Evam Svachite Svata Eva Siddha Atma Kriyo Rato Bhagavan Anantaha Tam Nirvrito Diyakarto Bhajeta Samsara Hetu Paramam Cha Yatra Evam Svachite Svata Eva Siddha Atma Priyorartho Bhagavan Anantaha Tam Nirvrito Niyakarto Bhajeta Samsara Hetu Paramanscha Yatra Evam Svachite Svata Eva Siddha Atma Priyorto Bhagavan Anantaha Tam Nirvrito Niyakarto Bhajeta Sansara Hetu Paramanscha Yatra
Evam Svachite Svata Eva Siddha
Evam Svachite Svata Eva Siddha
Atma Priyorta Bhagavanananta Amnivrito Niyato Bhajita Samsara Hetu Paramam Shriyatra
एवं सचित्ते सदैव सिद्धा आत्मा प्रियोत्त भगवानन्तः निवृत्तो नियतार्थो भजेता संसारहेतु परमस्य यत्र
एवं स्वचित्ते स्वतएव सिद्धा निवृत्तो नियतार्थो भजेता संसारहेतु परमस्य यत्र
एवं स्वचित्ते स्वत एव सिद्धा योगितो भगवान् अनन्ता निवृत्तो नियतार्थो भजेता संसारहेतु परमस्य यत्र
एवं स्वचिते स्वत एव सिद्धा मा प्रियर्थो भगवान् अनन्तः निवृत्तो नियतार्थो भजेता संसारहेतु परमस्य यत्र
Evam, thus, Swachite, one's own heart, Svataha, by his omnipotence, Eva, certainly, Siddha, fully represented, Atma, the super soul, Priyaha, very dear, Ardhataha, substance, Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Anantaha, the Eternal Unlimited, Tam, unto him, Niravritaha, being detached from the world, Niyata, permanent, Arata, the Supreme Being, Bhajeta, one must worship, Samsara Hetu, the cause of the conditioned state of existence, Uparamaha, cessation, Cha, certainly, Yatra, in which. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Thus being fixed, one must render service unto the Super Soul, situated in one's heart by His omnipotency. Because He is the Almighty Personality of Godhead, eternal and unlimited, He is the ultimate goal of life, and by worshipping Him, one can end the cause of the conditioned state of existence. Purport. As confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, 61st verse, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is the all-pervading, omnipresent Super Soul. Therefore, one who is a yogi can worship only Him, because He is the substance and not the illusion. Every living creature is engaging in the service of something else. A living being's constitutional position is to render service, but in the atmosphere of Maya, or illusion, or the conditioned state of existence, the conditioned soul seeks the service of illusion. A conditioned soul works in the service of his temporary body, bodily relatives, like the wife and children, and the necessary paraphernalia for maintaining the body and bodily relations, such as the house, land, wealth, society, and country. But he does not know that all such renderings of service are totally illusory. As we have discussed many times before, this material world is itself an illusion, like a mirage in the desert. In the desert there is an illusion of water, and the foolish animals become entrapped by such an illusion, and run after water in the desert, although there is no water at all. But because there is no water in the desert, one does not conclude that there is no water at all. The intelligent person knows well that there is certainly water in the seas and oceans, but such vast reservoirs of water are far, far away from the desert. One should therefore search for water in the vicinity of seas and oceans and not in the desert. Every one of us is searching after real happiness in life, namely eternal life, eternal or unlimited knowledge and unending blissful life. But foolish people who have no knowledge of the substance search after the reality of life in the illusion. This material body does not endure eternally, and everything in relation with this temporary body, such as the wife, children, society, and country, also changes along with the change of body. This is called samsara, or repetition of birth, death, old age, and disease. We would like to find a solution for all these problems of life, but we do not know the way. Herein it is suggested that anyone who wants to make an end to these miseries of life, namely repetition of birth, death, disease, and old age, must take to this process of worshiping the Supreme Lord and not others, as it is also ultimately suggested in the Bhagavad Gita, 1865. If we at all want to end the cause of our conditioned life, we must take to the worship of Lord Sri Krishna, who is present in everyone's heart by his natural affection for all living beings, who are actually the parts and parcels of the Lord. Bhagavad Gita 18.61. The baby in the lap of his mother is naturally attached to the mother, and the mother is attached to the child. But when the child grows up and becomes overwhelmed by circumstances, he gradually becomes detached from the mother, although the mother always expects some sort of service from the grown-up child and is equally affectionate toward her child, even though the child is forgetful. Similarly, because we are all part and parcels of the Lord is always affectionate to us, and he always tries to get us back home, back to Godhead. But we, the conditioned souls, do not care for him, and run instead after the illusory bodily connections. We must therefore extricate ourselves from all illusory connections of the world, and seek reunion with the Lord, trying to render service unto him, because he is the ultimate truth. Actually, we are hankering after him as the child seeks the mother. And to search out the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we need not go anywhere else, because the Lord is within our hearts. This does not suggest, however, that we should not go to the places of worship, namely the temples, churches, and mosques. Such holy places of worship are also occupied by the Lord, because the Lord is omnipresent. For the common man, these holy places are centers of learning about the science of God. When the temples are devoid of activities, the people in general become uninterested in such places, and consequently the mass of people gradually become godless, and a godless civilization is the result. Such a hellish civilization artificially increases the conditions of life, and existence becomes intolerable for everyone. The foolish leaders of a godless civilization try to devise various plans to bring about peace and prosperity in the godless world under a patent trademark of materialism. And because such attempts are illusory only, the people elect incompetent, blind leaders, one after another, who are incapable of offering solutions. If we want at all to end this anomaly of a godless civilization, we must follow the principles of revealed scriptures, like the Srimad Bhagavatam, and follow the instruction of a person like Sri Sukadeva Goswami, who has no attraction to material gain. This is a very thorough explication of a verse by Srila Prabhupada. we have heard from the Supreme Lord in the form of Bhagavad Gita, and here in this verse from Sukadeva Goswami, that the goal of life is to surrender oneself in service to God. And this, we are told, will solve all of the problems of life. Those problems are summarized in a very simple and broad way as birth, death, old age, and disease. Each one of us has so many incidental problems. I'm sure if we go around the room, every one of us can list at least 10 problems which at the moment are disturbing one. However, if we look on a broader scale, we have to agree that there are more important or serious problems that every one of us faces. And what are these? Birth, old age, disease, and death. Birth is a problem because the pain of being trapped inside a womb for 9 months is a very serious difficulty. And beyond that, that is if one is a human birth. But if one is taking birth in a lower species of life, it is even more problematic. Birth is a very serious problem. We tend to not grasp the pain that is involved in birth. The mother certainly goes through the pain of being pregnant for many months and the severe pain of labor in which the child is born. But this does not in any way approximate the difficulty of the embryo as it lies within the womb of the mother. Nowadays, people want to discount the fact that the embryo is alive. I was hearing from one disciple that the disciple's daughter is pregnant, and so going to the hospital, they were testing the child within the womb to see the condition of the child. And the daughter was hearing the beating of the heart of the child. And the nurse who was assisting mentioned, they started to talk, mentioned that those who decide to have an abortion, one of the things they never like to do is hear the beating of the infant's heart in the womb. Because when a mother hears the heartbeat of the child, it is practically impossible for the mother to deny that life is there, that the baby is actually tangible, real, a being, a personality. But our godless civilization, very interesting, you're hearing me read the purport, but interesting that in print, the word God is capitalized with a capital G, but the word godless has a small g. I used this word in a paper I was writing, and my typist, who's not present, typed the word with a capital G. When I was reading the word godless with a capital G, I was thinking, something is wrong with this. Because if God is not present, then how can you capitalize the G? That's why it's with a small G, because godless means without God. So why is there no question of that? We don't spell materialism with a capital M. Although I suppose that nowadays people would like to spell it with a capital M. And that is precisely the problem. The problem is to distinguish reality from illusion. Just like how do we know that life is present within the womb? Well, this is a big debate now. Very, very big debate. Pro-life or pro-choice. Some people say that life only begins when a child comes out of the womb. And others argue generally from the point of their respective religious convictions, that life exists within the womb. Now, how are we going to determine this? Of course, both sides have various types of arguments. The simple argument that we would give from the material point of view is that without life being there, what is the meaning of growth? How can something be growing if it is not alive? Now, they may argue that it is alive, but it's not a person yet. A person only becomes a person outside the body. When there's a very interesting discussion about this in the Bhagavatam, in which Vyasadeva gives us a picture of the child within the womb. Not only a picture, but Vyasa allows us to hear more than the beating of the child's heart. Vyasa allows us to hear the thoughts of the child who is within the womb. Now, we don't argue that it's possible to hear the beating of a heartbeat of the embryo, but we would, at least some people would argue, that it's not possible to know what are the thoughts of an infant within the womb. This is the jurisdiction of Srimad Bhagavatam, and this is really the divide that separates the theist from the atheist. A theist believes that it is possible to penetrate beyond the realm of matter into the realm of spirit with the help of God and God's representatives. Whereas a non-believer believes only in the experience of the senses and the mind. Now, 100 years ago or 200 years ago or whatever, it may not have been possible to hear the beating of a child's heart within the womb of a mother. Now, because science has become sufficiently advanced, it is possible. But that does not mean that 200 years ago there were no child's hearts beating in the mother's womb. It simply meant that our science was limited. Einstein, for example, came up with the conclusion that there are no truths that are impossible to be understood. But the problem is that we lack the technology, we lack the science at the present moment to understand them. He was unprepared, for example, to accept that certain things just had their limitations in terms of theories. His conclusion was, his theory was, or his understanding was, that our science has not yet come up to the level of reality. Present-day scientists may admit that to some extent, but they often make statements which suggest that reality is such and such a way. Einstein's point was that reality may be far more than what we understand it to be. Just as we see, for example, that the heartbeat could not be understood so easily 200 years ago, now it is understood. So in the same way, it may not be possible at the present moment to enter into the thoughts of an unborn child. It is possible for me to enter into your thoughts or for you to enter into mine because we can talk to each other. I can ask you, what are you thinking? And you can say, I'm thinking in such and such a way. But nobody can question an unborn child. If they could, there would be no abortions performed. Because I doubt if actually it is a fact that the unborn embryo has thoughts, that they'll say, I'm waiting to be killed, or I want to be killed, or I give my mother the freedom to choose. We can't imagine any young child today, saying that, nor do we become, it is abhorrent. We become aghast. The news becomes, everybody becomes very disturbed if a mother or father kills their infant children. Nowadays, the news, that's fairly common. I mean, at least every few weeks there's another news show about somebody who's killed their children. Well, the children didn't want to be killed. That's why everybody's disturbed. Nobody says that a mother has or a father has the right to decide whether or not their young children should stay alive. Nobody says that. Everybody says they have the right to life. This is not only guaranteed, the right to life, liberty, and happiness is not only guaranteed by the United States Constitution, it's a fundamental principle which all over the world is accepted amongst human societies. But because we can't enter into the thoughts of the unborn child, so we think they have no right. We only consider the right of the parents. But the Bhagavatam gives us the ability to hear the thoughts of the child who has not yet taken birth. And the child speaks. He speaks. He says that I am undergoing great difficulty, being packed up here in my mother's womb. I feel so much difficulty. And he prays to the Supreme Lord. He says, for so many lifetimes I have neglected you. Now I pray that if you get me out of this circumstance, I promise to serve you throughout my life. It is, according to the Bhagavatam, this is the promise that every one of us, the prayer that each one of us recites while in our mother's womb. So the question must come, what happened? Why is it that if everyone has prayed in this way, that so few people in the world are engaged in serving God? That is explained that the pain of birth is so severe that it causes loss of memory. We see that sometimes a person undergoes such a serious, painful experience that they forget entirely what has happened. Sometimes for many days they can't remember, can't recall what has happened for 2, 3, 4, 5 days. I was reading Indra Duman, was written in the second volume of his diary, and Nishrina Kapacha, his secretary, was attacked. They were in Sarajevo. How do you pronounce that? Huh? Sorry. They were in that location, Serbia, just after the war. Peace had been declared, a truce for a few months. And the devotees were going to do food distribution, so to gather people, they went out on the kirtan, they did kirtan on the streets. And a huge, unfortunately, it was a Muslim holy day. And they were out there realizing that they were heading towards a mosque. And somehow or other, some persons who were soldiers in the war attacked them. And one of the devotees was hit on the head, severely attacked, and hit on the head, and lost consciousness, and could not recall anything that had happened to him for 5 days previous to that incident. Couldn't remember anything. So sometimes we, because of some very severe, painful circumstance, we forget. So try to envision or try to imagine what is the experience of a child going head first through the channel of the mother's body to take its birth. And you're squeezed through such a tight hole and then coming out. So forgetfulness takes place. So when we say the pain of birth, people should understand what we're talking about. The pain of birth is very severe, and everyone is aware of this pain of disease. Constantly we go through one disease. Nowadays, disease is just something people live with. People live with how many times do you get a flu? Every year you expect to get it once a year or twice a year. And there are much more serious illnesses that people get. We're constantly battling illnesses of various types. And old age is something we try to forget, but we can't totally forget it. People have now made arrangements where they put the elderly in old age homes. You see, why? Because number one, they find it difficult to look after the elderly. It's too much problem. But there's another reason, which is that they don't want to confront the pain, the suffering of old age. No one can imagine, people cannot imagine, for example, from Vedic culture, in cultures where it was the duty of the children to look after their elderly parents. No one can imagine giving their parents to some stranger to look after. Your parents who raised you, who brought you up from the time you were born, who, gave you so much love and concern and consideration, now in their time of need, you would trust them to some stranger and pay some money. But that is what happens. That is what happens. People don't want to be bothered, they say. Bothered. If you did your parents think like that? I don't want to be bothered with you. Even when you grow up, parents don't think like that. Even when you're 30, 40, 50, mothers and fathers are still, in anxiety about their children. But today's civilization has arranged everything, institutionalized everything, dehumanized things to such an extent that people put their parents away. And it gets beyond that. It goes beyond that. In some civilizations, as I have told you, sometimes they even kill their parents. Some civilizations even, some societies even eat their children, or their parents. They do. There are tribes in Africa that do this as a way of respecting the elder, they eat them. And they have a theory about how that is a way of respecting their elder. We can't imagine that, but they have. So, how are we going to adjust or decide or determine these sort of issues? For example, about abortion or so many other issues. We have to hear from some superior type of authority. As Einstein said, if our own abilities are restricted or limited, then we have to reach out to some type of unlimited or unrestricted authority. And this is the whole contention of Vedic knowledge. The contention is that the source of this knowledge is perfect. That this knowledge comes from God. That is the meaning of revealed scripture. It doesn't come from some individual with shortcomings, imperfect senses, the tendency to sensory illusion, the ability to be mistaken, and the propensity for cheating. These are defects which we, as conditioned souls, have to accept. We make mistakes, we become illusions, and we cheat, or we get cheated. So, from us cannot come perfect knowledge. But the statement is that perfect knowledge comes from a perfect individual, and that perfect individual is God. Now, what is the special quality of this knowledge? How does it come? The next question is that, all right, it may be perfect, but it has come through imperfect individuals. Again, Vyasa, for example, the power of the Bhagavatam, is not considered a conditioned soul. He is a soul, but he's an empowered soul. That empowerment transforms his ability from ordinary human ability to divine ability. Vyasa's writing of the Bhagavatam, for example, the Bhagavatam. Take the Mahabharata. Mahabharata is 8 times longer than the Odyssey and Iliad. The Odyssey and Iliad are very famous in Western literature, epic literatures. One part of the output of Vyasa, just one book, Mahabharata, is 8 times longer than the Odyssey and Iliad combined, in a much more technical language. And that's just one part of the Vedic heritage. And the Vedic heritage is much, much more extensive. So who can do this? Actually, nowadays, scholars discount the fact that Vyasa wrote of it. They think that, no individual can write such a thing. So they assign authorship to, they don't know who wrote these books. They just say that these books, it's not very scholarly, but they just say the books gradually were added to by various writers. But it's interesting that when Indologists, even though they also believe that, when they read from the Vedas, they'll say Vyasa has written. As a convention, they say Vyasa has written. As a convention, but they can't assign the authorship to anyone else. But they have to say Vyasa wrote it. Actually, they don't know who wrote it. Neither can they get the time that they try to date these literatures. And for example, they'll say certain Puranas are written in the 15th century. That's how late, as recently as 15th century. But they admit that's the copy, the manuscript copy we have. They cannot say when they were written. They don't know. They admit we don't know. This is coming from a long time ago. Long time ago. And if you want to find perfect knowledge, people say, why do you have so much faith on these literatures? I have faith on these literatures because they make sense. I think that this statement makes good sense. That when you go in a desert and there's a mirage of water, and you find that there is no water, you don't conclude there is no such thing as water. You just conclude that this is a place where there is no water. And Prabhupada's point, therefore, is that, as he makes it here, when you see an illusion of various types, you don't conclude that there is no reality. There is water, but you have to find out where the water is. Similarly, when you penetrate one illusion after another, don't become foolish and think there's no such thing as God. Neti, this idea of negation. This table is not permanent. This microphone is not permanent. This floor is not permanent. This world is not permanent. Therefore, what is permanent? Everything in my experience has been impermanent. Therefore, I conclude there is no such thing as permanence. That is wrong. That is imperfect logic. As imperfect as going to an ocean and finding no water and saying there's no such thing as real water. You have looked in the wrong place. So where do we want to look to find out that permanent reality? This verse states you can look in your heart. Now, again, there's a problem. Because from a material point of view, you look in your heart, you only find muscle and blood. So what does the statement mean? Look in your heart. Now, if we suggest that it is a statement which implies something of a higher dimension, supernatural. Again, modern-day theologians, modern-day religious people have figured out that that is unacceptable. Modern-day religious people have become convinced by materialism that anything having to do with supernaturalism is itself an illusion. They have basically become convinced that there's no such thing as a transcendent being, God. Religion has come to that point today, that it has rejected the concept of God because they have bought into various, based on various theories, whether it's Darwin's theory or theories of relativity, but one doesn't have to come to that conclusion. Darwin's theory does not necessarily have to lead to the conclusion that there is no God. That's why the Catholic Church now accepts evolution. Did you know that? They do. They accept evolutionary theory, but they still hold the principle of a transcendent being. But this transcendent being, be he inside your heart or beyond the universe, is not able to be seen with material vision. Well, there are many things that you cannot see with material vision. You can test, for example, the movement of the mind, but you can't hold to the movement. You can't hold on to the movement of the mind, but there are machines which can be hooked up to the brain, which show the movement of mental function. Well, there's also consciousness. How do you show the existence of consciousness? How do you demonstrate the existence of consciousness? Or how do you explain the existence of consciousness? Consciousness means alert. You can say on a very simplistic definition, means alertness. But where does consciousness come from? This is one of the greatest problems which face modern-day science. to explain how consciousness originates. How do you understand, for example, the emotions of a praying devotee? And this is something. Last night there was a show on about the Hajj. The Hajj is when Muslims go to Mecca. At least once in a lifetime, Muslims should go to Mecca and perform this pilgrimage to Mecca. And in this pilgrimage, at least 2-3 million people are all performing the exact same activity and feeling so many emotions, crying and bowing down and doing so many things. Just like we in a temple room on a smaller scale. So many people dancing back and forth, bowing down, crying. What is the cause of such emotions? Now, material scientists would say that this is just a psychological phenomenon. You have convinced yourself, psychologically, you have convinced yourself and are in a certain disposition, and all of you share the same type of mentality, and that's why you're now experiencing these emotions. Well, that's one type of explanation. How do you explain, for example, taste? The taste of an ice cream and why it's pleasant. Is there really a scientific explanation for this? That scientific explanation only goes to a certain point. It can't really equal the experience of the taste of ice cream. In philosophy, they deal with this question. That how do you explain the taste of food? Because philosophically, you can't come really to the full point. You can't give, if I tell you, what is it, how do you explain in scientific terms, the taste of ice cream? What are you going to do? Chemically analyze it? Does chemical analysis explain the taste of ice cream? And the experience of tasting ice cream? No, it doesn't. So there has to be a language which can explain experience. And especially, there has to be a particular language to explain religious experience. And you can't use scientific I'm saying scientific, but any type of material explanations to explain spiritual experience. For that, you have to turn to a spiritual language and spiritual textbooks or spiritual science. And that's what we have here. And to understand God, the existence of God within the heart, will not be possible by looking at a medical textbook. Because the thing that we're trying to explain goes beyond that science. So we have to deal with this in today's world. Because in today's world, science is now the accepted authority. We don't discount science. We only say, as Einstein said, that it has its limitations. And we would therefore suggest that along with material science should go this spiritual science. Material science is a type of technology. It facilitates technological achievements and progress, and therefore it is welcome or useful to the extent that it's not harmful. But it's also very harmful if it's misused. Just like today, look what is happening with the environment. The environment is being polluted, terribly polluted, to the point where it may be impossible to sustain life on this planet if things keep going in the direction they're going, at least in future centuries. It may be impossible. There's some very interesting theories about why this is happening. Some people say that since the scientific revolution, industrial revolutions of the 17th and 18th century, this is the start of polluting the environment. But some people theorize that it's gone far, much further back than that. It goes back to, when people started to do agriculture, in a large-scale agriculture. Originally, agriculture was subsistence farming. Just like you go to India, you go to a village, and everybody owns their own bullock, pair of bullock teams, right? And they farm a plot of land large enough for maintaining their family with a little excess for trade. But in Europe, the earth was much more compacted And so they had to develop a type of plow with a steel blade, which would cut the earth very deeply. And in order to cut the earth, they had to use large teams of bullocks. So they would keep 8 oxen. Now, no individual family could afford 8 oxen. So they the village combined their oxen together, and they did their cultivating. But by doing this, they suddenly, expanded the productivity to a much larger extent, more than it was required for subsistence. So their whole mentality changed. Now, some people theorize, and what happened, instead of the human being being part of nature, right? When one person farms, it is a human being is just one person in a type of harmony with nature. But when you start to farm and you can figure out how to get more and more out of the land, more and more, it becomes man against nature. Man dominating over nature. Because that actually, what does science mean? The whole idea of the scientific revolution was how to control nature. Nature was seen as a machine which had to be dominated and controlled. So where does this idea of dominance come? Well, some people say that it comes from religion. There's one theory that it comes from the Judeo-Christian understanding of religion. Because in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Testament, in the story of creation, God makes so many creatures, and He makes nature. And why does He make these? For what purpose? For man's service. Even women are made for the pleasure of man. Women are made for the pleasure of man. Other creatures are made for the pleasure of man. And nature is made for the pleasure of man. What does this mean? And God gave man dominion. So there's a very big argument that is going on today that so much of the problems of environmental crisis today date all the way back to Christian understanding of man dominating over nature. Now, what is the understanding that we get from the Bible? Do we have the same problem? No, we don't have this problem. People who blame Christianity, they at least say that there was one Christian saint who is free of blame, and that was Francis of Assisi. This Francis of Assisi, he would address the ant, brother's son. He personalized all of nature and saw everyone in a democratic way. And what does the Bhagavatam say? Vidya vinaya sampane brahmane gavani hastane sune chayeva sapaticha pandita samadarshana. A pandit sees with equal vision all living entities. All living entities. Respects all living entities. A hunter, Migrari, when he was influenced by Narada Muni, what did he do? When he saw an ant in front of him, he would not walk. We see the film of Prabhupada's life, and Prabhupada's father, remember we were all watching on Friday, when Prabhupada's father was in the shop, leaving the shop at night, what did he do before he closed the gates of the shop? Do any of the children remember? See how attentive you were when you were watching. How many of you watched that video last Friday? Raise your hand. Okay, do you remember what Prabhupada's father did? He put some, what? Right, did your mother just tell you that? Okay, good. He put some rice down in the shop, in the cloth shop. Why did he do that? So the rats would have some food to eat. Now, of course, he was thinking economically. He said, if they don't eat the rice, they're going to eat my cloth, and I will lose money. But he said they also have a right to eat. So it may have been one saint in Christianity, or a few, who counteracted that whole idea of dominion. But the whole Bhagavatam, the whole Vedic literature, the very foundation of the Vedas is based on this principle. And I feel so sorry, you see, that theologians have to keep searching and squeezing this one theological view called Christianity for answers. It's like they're squeezing blood out of a stone. When they've got, this huge corpus of knowledge in the Vedas, but they're ignorant of it. completely ignorant of. A worldview that is in every way consistent with modern thought. So consistent with modern thought that will give them answers that they're looking for, but they're ignorant. They're ignorant. Now this is Prabhupada's mission, to bring this Vedic knowledge, to the world. That, we should remember, is our purpose. We have a very important task, very important responsibility. Not only to be Krishna conscious ourselves, but to give this knowledge to others, to make them understand these concepts in ways which are meaningful to them. Whether you're dealing with a scientist or whether you're dealing, with some housewife shopping at a corner store, you have to speak a language which will reach out to people, which will bring home the Vedic knowledge. And of course, you have to live it, you have to embody it yourself. As Prabhupada says towards the end of the purport here. Follow the instruction of a person like Sri Sukadeva Goswami, who has no attraction for material gain. Why is Sukadeva Goswami a person to hear from? Why is Prabhupada a person to learn from? Why will we be persons who are worthy of associating with? Only if we're free from the attraction for material gain. What does that mean, to be free from the attraction for material gain? Material gain comes in so many shapes and forms. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave 3 statements: Nandanam, Nanjanam, Sundarim. Nandanam. Not to be after wealth. Why do people want wealth? To purchase enjoyment for the senses. Nandanam. Nanjanam. Not to have the desire for followers. Followers means for fame. Tell me something good about myself. Let me hear my praises. To be constantly desiring appreciation from others. The Sundarim. To seek pleasure coming from the opposite sex. Attraction due to lust. Unless we get free from these 3. Lust, the desire for fame, and the desire for sensual pleasures, we will not be worthy of conducting this great mission. Therefore, it's not enough simply to memorize, to be able to quote verses. We have to live by these teachings. If we don't transform our own lives personally, then no one will bother to hear from us. That was why I personally could not become inspired when I went to the university as a young man. I found that the professors were very knowledgeable, but I thought that their lives are no different than mine, and I want to change my life. When I met Prabhupada, what impressed me, more than Prabhupada's knowledge, what impressed me was Prabhupada's character. Prabhupada's character was most impressive. His quality as a person. So what is going to impress people, not so much is our knowledge, is as our personal standards of life. This community, for example, we're making a statement here. We're not making an individual statement. It's a statement which is a community statement. Therefore, how we interact together, how we relate with each other, is as important as how each one of us chants his or her rounds or deals with any individual person. The test is how you can live with other people, because that's what spiritual life is all about. When you go back to the kingdom of God, it's not just you and God, you and Krishna. How do you relate to other people? And Christianity, as we said last week, remember when I was lecturing, we had a discussion, has become a religion of simply relating with others. Almost to the point of not even bothering with that most important other, which is God. Now we have to balance everything. We have to relate to Krishna, and we have to relate to each other, we have to relate to ourselves. All of these relationships have to be very good. then when people come here, they will feel what this Krishna consciousness is. It has to be translated practically. It has to be real. It can't simply be something in print, on a book. That won't convince people. It will bring them here. It will interest them. But if they don't see what's written in this book enacted in real life, nobody will become convinced. They will just think this is another type of hypocrisy. Therefore, what did Prabhupada do? He gave 2 or 3 hours of his day, maybe the most important 2 or 3 hours, no doubt, to writing these books. But what did he do with the other 20 hours? He spent it on trying to train us to be what these books describe. By his own example, by his lecturing, by his words, by his guidance. So important. Remember, you are not just living for yourself, you are living for so many others. Every action, every thought that you have will affect other people. So it is so important, the standards that we set. As the Gita says, whatever a great person does becomes an example for others to follow, all the world will pursue. So who is a great person? Are we going to just leave it? Prabhupada is that great person. He did it, and we don't have to now. Well, what is that religion called?
Christianity.
Yeah, it's called Christianity, to a great extent, by most people. Jesus did it. Jesus paid the price for all of us so that we can do, we can sin. And Prabhupada condemned that philosophy. Jesus did what he did for what purpose? He says very clearly, so that you can become perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. His whole purpose was to make everyone perfect. So, this is the Bhagavatam's purpose also, to teach us how we can worship the Supreme Lord, who is so close. How close? Within the heart of your heart. Within your heart is your soul, and within your heart of your soul is Krishna, God, Paramatma, the Super Soul. At the same time, he's before us in the form of the deity. And he's with us on our lips, on our tongue, when we chant his holy names. He comes in the form of prasada. He comes in the form of his servants, his devotees. Krishna is everywhere. Therefore, we have to simply be very humble, very respectful, if we want to acknowledge the presence of Krishna in our life. So we'll stop here. If anyone has any comments, questions, please speak.
Usually you're saying now, Albert Einstein is saying that our level of science and technology hasn't developed the state of understanding higher reality. In fact, I was reading Scientific American, it's saying that now they've discovered that the universe is in the shape of an egg. That's what Srimad Bhagavatam said in the beginning. And they also say that simultaneously many universes are being created and destroyed at the same time. That's the view of the model of computer.
You should write a book on models of the universe. And write a book on this. Is that your field of study? Well, then you should convince someone whose field of study is that to write a book on universal models and then present our model according to Vedic thought. It is very interesting. People are just ignorant of Vedic knowledge. If they become aware of it, they'll be very much impressed.
Prabhupada wanted planetarium.
Yeah, Prabhupada wanted. Let's see Prabhupada's intelligence. Prabhupada wanted us to build the largest temple in the world. Right? Now, every religion wants to have the largest temple in the world. So what's the difference? Prabhupada wanted, just like every religion wants to have the largest temple in the world. So did Prabhupada, so does Krishna Consciousness. Why do we want the largest temple in the world? There's a reason. Because in the middle of the temple, what did Prabhupada want to put? A planetarium. In the middle of the temple, which we're going to build in Mayapur, Lord Chaitanya's birthplace, is this huge temple, 350-foot high temple. And inside the temple is a model of the universe. That was Prabhupada's interesting. Prabhupada said everybody wants to come to a temple to see a big temple. They'll come into this temple, and by walking this temple, they'll walk into the model of the universe. And they will see the different planetary systems, and they will also see how they are all related to these planetary systems, and where is the kingdom of God, and where is Bhaktivedanta Krishna situated. What a nice idea about that. What an intelligent plan. Not just to put, what do you usually put inside a temple? A deity of Radha and Krishna. Well, Prabhupada said, all right, we're going to have our deity of Radha and Krishna, but Radha and Krishna could be inside a model of the universe. People are going to understand that God is not simply supernatural, but He exists within the context of nature also. How God is related to the universe. And still personal. You see, modern day theologians, they say God is related to the universe, but they've lost the conception of God as a transcendent being, as a person. They've impersonalized God. Well, we keep the connect. We make the connection. Yeah, God is connected to this universe thoroughly, inside even the atom, but He's still a person. Another question or comment?
Just a little example of what you were saying about how scientists don't realize their limits or past their limits. So there's a little story that gives a very nice example of this. A cowboy and an Indian. The cowboy draws a circle on the ground. He says, "This is what the Indian knows." And then he draws a bigger circle around it and says, "And this is what the white man knows." And the Indian looks at that for a second. He says, "That's what the Indian knows, and that's what the white man knows. And outside this line is what neither the Indian nor the white man knows."
And this is an important discussion also, is that another view today of religion is that no one has that knowledge. Everyone just has knowledge of what's within their circle. So they will also say, this Srimad Bhagavatam, okay, it's a great circle, but no one has the knowledge outside that circle, only God. Now what would be our conclusion about that? What is our response? Okay, here's another circle. Maybe this circle is wider than any other circle of any other religion, even any other science. But still, it's still a circle. I gave the answer the other week, which I think is our answer, that no one knows that beyond that circle, even God doesn't know. Because, as we say, God is Himself discovering Himself and His love for His devotees. That's a very modern thought. Even very modern theologians will love this idea. When you tell them that even God doesn't know, they immediately become very happy. Any way you can limit or criticize God, you become very happy. But this is not a limitation. It's actually a glorification of God. Because we say that God's love for His devotees is forever increasing. So He Himself can never fully comprehend because the love is constantly increasing. He can understand the theory that my love is increasing, but what that experience of that love is, even He is discovering. But that's not a criticism of Krishna, that's a glorification of Krishna. But it's a super-modern glorification. Okay, we'll stop here until next week. I will announce that our dear godbrother, Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, is arriving here at 11 o'clock on Tuesday morning. And he will be staying here until Thursday morning. So all devotees, we will request Mother Jayanti to bring her Guru Coolies here on Tuesday so we can receive him nicely. He'll be coming through the front. So I was thinking the children could write some nice greeting cards of his arrival. If they assemble maybe about 11:45, that will be the time. And if it's raining, it can just be in the hallway or in the temple room. Then they'll come in, we'll give him a nice reception, and he will speak the devotees. And he'll be here, as I said, till Thursday morning. He'll do Bhagavatam class, I'm sure on Wednesday, perhaps on Thursday morning. Perhaps another program we'll discuss when he comes. So this is an opportunity for advancing to receive and serve the saintly person. And everybody should take advantage of his association while he's here. Krishna Bhagavatam.
Gurudev ki